In terms of difficulty, this is probably on a par with creating volumetric clouds, though requires different knowledge and skills. It's still quite a complicated thing to set up, so I'll try and go slowly. As you can see at the moment, we're in the default setup. Bryce, default sky, lighting, infinite plane, nothing very complicated. I'm going to File, Import Object, and I've created this object in Wings 3D specifically to perform this tutorial and make this effect. So it's sort of a C shape, and it's going to be reflective so that it's got this inner surface that we can generate the caustic effect with. As things stand, I saved it as an object, obj, I think it is as a waveform object, I think, file, and this comes in automatically smooth, but the smoothing that's applied is not appropriate, so I'm going to have to edit that, and if I lower this angle here, it will respect the corners, but it'll still smooth the inner curve, I hope. So I've got smoothing on the inner curve here, but I've got corners and flat surfaces now, so it's just suiting the geometry that I need for this. The other thing I'm going to need to do is set things up, so we're going to use transients to create this effect. So I'm going to have to turn the sky atmosphere off, set the sky to fully black, go into the Skylab here. I'm going to disable the sun and moon. I'm just checking we've got the shadow intensity at 100 because I will be using a standard radial light. I'll explain the role that that is going to perform. The other thing I'm going to need with the caustic effect is I'm going to have to modify the material here so it's got some reflection. So I'm just keeping things very basic now. I'll add more sophisticated materials and effects as I go along, but the most important thing to do is set the effect up first. In the create shelf, I'm going to create my first radial light here, and what's important to remember is they've got to set the material settings and edit the light source, which is why I'm making this video again for the nth time, because I keep forgetting the steps. As I said, it's quite a complicated process. So I'm going to name this TA effect light. In the materials, I need to set it to normal and stop it from being transparent, so it's only going to generate diffuse. The reason for this is because when it comes to excluding or including, any light that's passed through transparency is no longer included as part of that process, so it becomes seen by the transients effect. Editing the light source, I've got to engage transients optimization, and I have learned that to get the most light out of this effect, switch to ranged, increase to maximum value so the range doesn't run out in your scene, and then the diffuse value here can be used to scale the effect. I'll leave it set at this value, but this is the way to generate the most effect. I'm going to use the influence controls in a second, but I'm going to show you why I'm going to do that. So I'll just check out of here, and I'm going to move my light source. I'm going to enlarge it and lift it up. So now the light hopefully is going to go in here and react with this reflective surface. But that's not going to happen yet until we set the render options. So in the render options, premium effects, I'm going to set the raise per pixel down, select true ambience mode, TA scattering correction for the best light simulation, boost light, so we've got lots of light to work with from the true ambience mode, set the maximum radius down to improve render efficiency. These are the things that are covered in other tutorials, so I just want to get on with looking at the effect at the moment, so I explain those in a very basic way. Right, as things stand now, we can't trust this nano preview. We could get an idea with accurate rendering, as you can see, but sometimes that can cause problems because it can slow the previewing down, slows down the main view, and then you can't do anything, but we'll see how it goes. I'll set it for now. Right, so if I render on the main view here, you can see we've got a bit of effect going on in here and light on the ground, so we need more light to drive this effect. So I'll edit this and I'll increase this value. I'll just stick a 1 in front of that and see how that looks. So yes, we've got masses of light now. This is good, and we can see there's an effect in here, but it's being covered up by the light that's arriving here, and this is because the ground's seeing the light source as well as this object, and this is where our influence control comes in. So edit this, and we include only the object. This is the object that's going to create the caustic effect, so we're going to create the effect separately from other lighting, and so this is why it gets quite complicated, because we've got to start employing more lighting. So now we're only dealing with the caustic effect and the object. This object is going to be, I want it to look like gold or bronze, so I'm going to change the material on that and then start working to make things look right. So one of the materials I'm going to use is from one of Horrow's and mine's forthcoming products. You could use anything set up in a similar way. I just want it to look nice for the render. It's got this diffuse value that gives it a nice copper, some anisotropic effects, repeating texture, but the most important thing is I'm going to provide it with plenty of reflection. So I'm just swapping the reflection in there and seeing how that looks, because with it having metallicity set, it will then transfer some of the diffuse colour to the effect, so we get the effect here on the inside. If I want to sharpen that effect, I need to reduce the size of the light source generating, because it's the surface of the light source. So you can see the effect is a bit sharper now, but weaker, so I can modify this to produce yet more light for the effect. But the drawback of this is that as the light source gets smaller, the noise level rises, because the difference between where this is getting the effect from the light source, which is very bright, and the environment, which is very dark, means that sometimes it sees the light source, sometimes it sees the dark, and then you get this high noise. So there's a payoff there between the two. The other thing we've got to consider is, okay, so we've got the effect working, but there's nothing to explain where this light's coming from. There's no light source where the light source is. It's not casting a shadow outside here. So at this point, I'm going to create another radial light that's going to explain where our effect's coming from. I'm going to place it more or less where that is, so the effect is coming from, and I'm going to edit it. I'm going to use this preview, even though that's only going to show me the direct lighting situation. So I'm going to, if I create a bit too much light there, then it's going to burn everything out. So if you use squared, let's see how that looks. So I've got some effect coming from that. And I could also use soft shadows, since I'm already rendering in premium effects, and that will create better quality lighting. So I just need to remember in the render option to switch soft shadows on for that, so the effect works. We'll have a look at how that looks. So now we've got the situation where this is being lit by the thing that's generating the effect, the Trambian's caustic effect light source. We've also got a light source lighting it again, and the ground, so this is probably going to get a bit too bright. So at this point I'm going to modify the material and reduce the diffuse setting, since it's being lit twice, to a half, and see how that looks. So now we're balancing effects out against one another. So this is going to be a metal object. I want it to look metallic, so it's got to reflect something, or that would certainly help. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of Horrow's in the image-based lighting tab here. Use HDRI, use one of Horrow's HDRIs that's supplied with this product. I've got a choice of three. In fact, there's a higher resolution, for low resolution, and a very highly specular convolved version. I'm going to choose just this standard one for now. I'm going to increase the intensity of it so it can be seen in the reflection. It doesn't matter about the quality, but I always set it down because it seems to improve performance. I don't want any light from this, so it's just a backdrop, and for it to be a backdrop I'm going to add it to the sky, which, as you know, was black. So here we go, we can render in scene. Now, although this isn't generating any effect, even though, and we are in Trambian's optimized mode anyway, it'll still see the backdrop. The Trambian's effect will see the backdrop, and the bright sources in this, because it's high dynamic range, are going to interfere with the render. As you can see, we're getting this noise, this blue noise, and also there's a reflection of a red object there, which is not entirely convenient. So I'm going to do, hold the control key down. I can rotate the HDRI and keep it on the same axis, so that will sort my reflection out, but I've still got to sort my noise out. To do that, I'm going to use another trick with the radial light sources. So I'll create a new radial light source, and I'm going to call this one TA blackout. Right, and this is going to be a very large radial light source that's going to operate as a surface to exclude the Trambian's effect from the backdrop, but it won't interfere with the reflection. That's the important thing. To achieve this, I edit it, Trambian's optimization, use gel, procedural, I'm going to turn it to normal, and then just turn everything off so it creates a TA light mop. So now with this in place, we should only have the TA effect working in, but we can still see the reflection outside, and it's catching a bit of light on the reflective backdrop there, and we can see that we're getting quite a strong image of the backdrop. If I wanted to soften that reflected image, if I go into the material here for this object, the blurred reflection premium effect is controlled by the luminance value, so HLS, hold the Alt key down, click on the colour swatch for this little menu, luminance value there. So if this value is set down low, it doesn't blur the reflection very much. If it's set very high, you get a lot of blur, so we'll just choose some sort of midway value and check out of that, check out of the material, go into the render options and set blurry reflections, and that will blur the reflection of the backdrop. So now we've got our effect, and we've got a bit of a shadow, and we've got this ground. And the ground's looking a bit boring actually, so I'm going to upgrade that material. So go into the material lab again, I'm going to use one of our metals, this one here, and I've chosen this one because it doesn't have any reflection and it's quite an interesting material to work as the ground plane. That's going to change the lighting a little bit, and it's also going to slow the render down because it's quite a complex material. And so to improve our previewing of this scene, rather than lower the rays per pixel, which will create a lot of noise, we still need the sampling. I'm going to use the document setup to reduce the size of the render. So now it's still looking a bit dark, and there's this very dark shadow region here. I could probably do with another light source. So at this point, I'll consider adding yet another light source that provides general ambient light. I'm going to use this global ambient color to drive the effect, and I'm going to create our light source. So it's another radial light. I'm going to enlarge it so it encompasses the scene but doesn't actually coincide with the blackout one, so it's still within the blackout. And this is going to be TA general ambient, and this is going to use the gel effect again. So if I edit this, a true ambient optimized light source, use gel, procedural, and go to normal, get rid of the diffusion, turn the ambience up, turn the transparency up, and I'm thinking about using the ambient channel here to actually drive some effect that will coincide with the backdrop, but I'll set it up just with a white at the moment. Include objects background, so by doing that it excludes everything, so I've only got the ambient effect. So yes, I'd like the light arriving in the ambient to reflect, to correspond with, I should say, the light that's in the HDRI backdrop. To achieve this, I can use product of ours. You can get it from brycetutorials.info, Bryce downloads, and it's our friend Mr. Bryce 7 Pro Spherical Mapper Esquire. And here it is, and what I can do with that is I'll have one saved in the create menu here. So I've got my spherical mapper, and I'll set that down at the world origin. I get rid of my infinite plane. I modify the camera position so it coincides with the origin of the spherical mapper. I remember to set my document aspect ratio to 2:1 to generate a correct spherical map, and I'll set the size down, it doesn't need to be very big. I'll go into render options and set it to 360-degree panoramic projection. I'll turn the atmosphere off, set the sky to black, go into here, into the IBL tab, use HDRI image. I'll load the specular convolved version, and I'll set the intensity up. In fact, I'll set it up higher, a bit brighter. I could modify these figures, but there's nothing for it to light into the scene, so it should be okay. I just need to remember to add it to the sky so we get to see something, and then if I render this now, if I manage to do everything correct for once, I get my spherical map. So I'll save that as SN map for USDS Caustics. So now I've done that, I can go back into my scene that I was working on and edit the ambient light source, go into procedural, set the ambient to a gel, set it to a picture, go into the texture source editor and load in my spherical map wherever I've dropped it. Here it is. and then check out of that. Remember, it automatically defaults from pictures to sinusoidal, and we want spherical, so that now is our spherical map. It won't yet be orientated to suit the HDRI backdrop. The way things work is that if we get everything right, we could rotate it round to that position. So we can rotate to that position, and I'll just do it roughly to save time. So there you go. So that the backdrop now is coinciding with the lighting environment. Obviously you can use the figures to get it very accurate, but I'm not going to worry about that because it's sort of getting beyond the scope of what I wanted to look at here. Now, just looking at this generally, final adjustments, this still looks a little bit bright, so I'm going to modify the material and lower the diffusion again, because this is getting lit by more light sources than other things are getting lit by. And the other question I've got to ask myself is this an appropriate level of effect? That's a more difficult question. I want the effect to look, I'm just moving the camera in. Actually, rather than move the, oops, I shouldn't have done that. Move the camera in, I'll narrow the field of view because it's a smaller subject. Right. Is it the appropriate level of effect? Well, I wanted it to be there because it was showing this effect off, but it might be a bit excessive. I mean, usually what you do is set the effect up and then start turning it down until it looks natural. I'm also going to rotate the HDRI slightly to alleviate that bright spot if I can, because that's distracting me somewhat. And well, since we're in premium effects anyway, we could go the whole hog. I'm going to add a sphere here, locate it on the corner of this object, and then I can use that in render options while set from the perspective view to engage depth of field, set current selection, so that's targeted on the sphere, and then we'll try, well, let's see, 0.5. We'll just have to experiment with this depth of field setting, so it gets, oh, not enough. I thought that would be enough. I'm going to see if I can get the background out of focus a bit, so because it is a small scale object, then it is appropriate to use depth of field, whereas if you start using a landscape, you start to get the tilt shift effect, and it sort of shrinks your landscape down. So don't usually have to push the lens radius up this much, but then again it depends on the distance from your camera and the distance across the object. So this was where the sphere was, so I know this bit should be in focus. I'm just waiting for that outer edge to go out of focus. So I just keep increasing the lens radius until it starts to blur just there. I don't want too much on that, just a slight bit of blur, because it'll let me my background goes out of focus there. So how is that going to look? Well, the only way to tell is to turn the raise per pixel up. Whoops, I keep doing that because I'm fighting with Camtasia Studio because it does interfere with the menu, so that might be a little bit excessive. But I suppose we're showing this effect off. We're getting the depth of field, so it's going to blur that corner slightly, which is what I want. So at this stage, I could go on a lot longer, but I'm trying to keep it fairly compact. What I shall do is I'll render this out and see how long it's going to take. So if I set this going, right, that's going to take 20 minutes. You still might be noise in this. Now if that occurs and we're already using maximum raise per pixel, the only way around it is to render at a larger scale and then reduce it in a paint package. But as far as possible, I try to avoid the use of post work, so we'll see how things look here. Oh, I was going to say I don't really want that shadow clipping off, so I'll just make that a little bit more central for my scene, so you can see they've got the effect of the nice soft shadow there. And we'll see how that renders. So I'll pause the video here and we'll have a look in a minute. Okay, 20 minutes later and we're rendered out. It doesn't look too bad. I mean, the surface has turned out nice, the depth of field effect's working, but there's quite a lot of noise in this effect. And as things stand, we're using the maximum raise per pixel. So as I suggested, the only thing we can do now is increase the render size. So in document setup, if I choose a 1 to 2, that'll mean that it'll have 4 times the area, so it'll take 4 times as long. But if we then reduce it back down, rescale it down with some kind of processing to average out, so it's not just pixel for pixel processing, then we should be able to get to a point where we've got a bit less noise. So we'll experiment with this. What's the render time on this going to be? About 1 hour 15 minutes. So I'll have to pause the video again and we'll see how this looks, and also have to stop AGV from scanning for viruses, otherwise it's really going to interfere with these things. So, okay, right, pause the video. So there's the completed render, and now what I'm going to do is look at saving that image, and then I'll load it into PaintShop Pro. I've just missed a few steps out there to speed things along. So before scaling this down to its original size, and then I hope that's going to reduce this noise effect, I was just thinking, well, very much the case of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, something odd appears to be going on with the depth of field effect along this edge, because there's a hard edge there and a soft edge, so it's almost as if depth of field is not working with certain types of the transience generated light, which is interesting and unexpected. Or maybe it's not working with some other component of maybe the blurred reflections interfering. It's something I'm going to have to investigate, because that edge there, that should all be out of focus, and it's not. It's part of it's out of focus and part of it's in focus, and well, I don't know what's going on there, but never mind. So managed to cover quite a lot of ground, and I think I've managed to include everything without making any glaring omissions, so you can set this up in the tutorial for yourself. It's not as nice as a render, I think, as the one I set up with the ring, which is a shame, but I suppose that's a consequence of you know, just a matter of luck really, because every time you set these scenes up and do things slightly differently, you get a different effect. So that's the result of the render and the end of the tutorial.